Each day, there are thousands of drivers that travel the length of the interstate, each driving to go home, to work, or any other destination. During their travel, some drivers may become involved in an accident that requires an emergency medical response. When crews show up to these accidents, they must be organized and have efficient operational strategies and tactics for every branch of the emergency response. This presentation will cover what is expected of firefighters, drivers, and company officers when responding to these calls. With each call for service within our district, tones will alert us that there is a call. When those tones go out, responders must prepare themselves for the call. The best way to do this is to read the dispatch note. This is the information obtained by the dispatch office, also known as the FAO, or Fire Alarm Office, from the PR, or person responding, about the incident. Remember that the quality of notes depends on the information provided by the PR. Unfortunately, this is all the information we have, and we base many of our operational decisions on them. We'll discuss deciphering dispatch notes in another presentation, but using them to determine if the initial resources assigned to a call will be enough to handle the incident. If there are not enough resources, or if there are not enough manpower to staff the resources dispatched, add units from other stations as soon as possible. Officers or senior members responding to the stations will have the priority in adding resources to the call to avoid confusion. If there's no officer or the senior member does not want to use the radio, the crew should communicate on who will talk to dispatch and make requests over the radio. Whatever resources you need, be it extra fire units, ambulances, air or ground, law enforcement, or heavy rescue, add them early in the call due to potential delays in response and distance. The resources that are initially assigned to respond will vary depending on the nature of the call and how it is coded. All traffic accidents are coded as 29, but the severity will vary on what the PR is reporting. Our CAD, or Computer Automated or Assistant Dispatch, classifies codes from O, A, B, C, D, and E for any calls that are medical or traumatic in nature. O, or Omega, is the least severe, followed by Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, Delta, and Echo as the most severe. Traffic accidents are usually come in as any of those, but most commonly are 29 Bravos or Deltas. The dispatch model for the MVFD is a rescue only on 29 Bravos and a squad and rescue for any 29 Delta. This is because there is a higher probability that more personnel will be needed for either extrication or patient care, and the probability of fire is also greater for Delta calls. As stated in the previous slide, if a single station lacks the needed resources, add another station to assist and staff that resource. Another important point to remember is that whoever is sitting in the front right seat of a unit with an MCT, or mobile computer terminal, must continually monitor the call for any updates in the notes. This may change what resources may be needed, and if these notes are missed, it can create issues with either manpower or managing the overall incident. Officers and senior members will again have priority for communicating with dispatch and ordering resources. However, if a member in the front seat is in their first response area, they should be the unit ordering more resources, especially if they are going to be first on scene. There are several factors that crews must consider once they arrive on scene. How many fire units are responding? How many patients are there? Is there a patient entrapped? The first officer or unit on scene will initially take many of these considerations, which then transition to the IC, or incident commander, as the incident progresses. The flowchart is a representation of what is expected of fire, EMS, and IC during a vehicle accident incident. We will spend the rest of this presentation breaking down the flowchart to detail expectations of first responders, firefighters, drivers, and officers. When the first unit arrives on scene, its personnel must perform the responsibilities of their rank or title. We will focus on the two main categories of a vehicle accident that form during the incident: fire or EMS. First responders and firefighters' primary focus once they arrive on the incident should be on any extrication needs. First responders have more flexibility in this regard, as they are limited to what they can do during extrication, allowing them to be assigned to assist in EMS. However, firefighters that are trained to perform extrication should prioritize this task. EMS providers should primarily focus on how many patients there are. The criticality of patients is important, but the number of patients takes a priority, as that will dictate how many EMS responders will need to be on scene to manage the incident effectively. We'll delve deeper into other considerations for EMS providers during another presentation on triage, but it's important to understand the basics of what should be the highest priority for each responder to consider upon arrival. As our view on the flow chart, we can shift our attention to the officers that respond to these incidents and the incident commander. It is not always possible to have an officer on every call that occurs within our district. This leaves the officer's duty to the most senior member that is willing to talk on the radio to manage the call. If the senior member does not want to run the incident, there are alternative methods to determine who will assume command. One way is for the member sitting in the front run seat of the unit to assume the role of officer on that call. Some reasons for this are the member can use the radio without distraction and has direct access to the most updated notes in real time while responding to the call. Complicating this is if the most junior responder is sitting in that front seat. It may be overwhelming to that individual to assume that role. This presents another method to determine who the acting officer will be. Communicating amongst members responding who will assume the role while en route. That person will need to communicate with whoever is sitting in the front seat to have the notes read to them so they can make informed decisions. This can make things a bit more complicated, but it is still a solution. Ultimately, the most effective way to determine who will run the call as the officer or acting officer should be sitting in the front seat, ensuring direct access to the notes and freedom from driving distractions. Once the officer or member acting as the officer has been determined and that unit arrives on scene, the member should establish command if 3 or more fire units are responding to the incident. This will help that member more effectively manage the resources responding by assigning specific tasks to each unit. This next section of the flow chart details what firefighters, drivers, and officers should be doing, whether extrication is needed or not. We will explore each role's responsibility during the incident on the next slide. The first unit has arrived on scene and its personnel begin to determine what needs to be done in the incident. This presentation focuses again on what the firefighters and first responders, drivers, and officers should be focusing on during the incident. Some members will have both fire and EMS responsibilities, requiring them to consider more during these types of calls. However, this guidance helps streamline actions for first responders without EMS licenses or are not the highest level of care. The first part of any accident scene is to assess whether extrication is needed. The initial steps are the same whether or not extrication is actually needed, which is to stabilize and de-energize the vehicle. This ensures the safety of both responders and the victims. The expectations differ if extrication has been determined to be necessary. For now, we will focus on situations where extrication is not needed. Firefighters should assist EMS with patient care if patients are present at the incident. If there is no patient, firefighters can assist the driver with isolating the scene and cleaning up the incident as needed. First responders should assist with scene isolation in either case, unless otherwise told by the officer or member in charge of their unit. Driver's primary considerations should be for scene isolation, using the unit to block the scene and direct traffic away from the incident. Once the scene is safe and the crew is operating within that safe area, the driver should shift their focus to providing suppression support if they are on a unit capable of doing so. They should place the unit into pump and deploy a charged hose line on the ground. If there is no fire on arrival, a smaller hose line, such as a hose reel or bumper line, is acceptable. If there is a fire, crews will need to determine the appropriate line, extinguish the fire, and then move on to other operations. If there are other units on scene, those units can accomplish the other tasks needed during suppression efforts. Also, a key consideration to take into account is if there is no fire, you can still deploy a hose line, but not charge it until told to do so. The role of an officer does not significantly change regardless whether extrication is needed or not. Officers must determine resource needs based on the instance requirements and triage reports from EMS personnel. They must also establish command if there are 3 or more fire department units responding to the call, if not done prior to their arrival. The remainder of this presentation will cover what is expected of crews if extrication is determined to be necessary for the incident. The slide provides an overview of those expectations, but we will examine each one step by step. Firefighters that are trained in extrication techniques will be responsible for extricating patients trapped in vehicles. Upon arrival at the scene, responders will encounter a significant amount of information and potential distractions. Firefighters must remain calm and proceed to the vehicle despite these distractions, begin to formulate an extrication plan. This plan will be determined by the training, knowledge, and experience of the firefighters on the crew, as well as the extent of vehicle damage and access. Firefighters should become proficient in different extrication techniques to ensure the most efficient extrication. As firefighters determine the extrication plan, both drivers and first responders should be setting up their tool cache. This will help expedite the plan so firefighters do not have to concern themselves with bringing equipment while attempting to determine the most effective extrication plan. This is also the role of the first responder in these calls, as they are limited in their extrication or patient care capabilities. Once the tool cache has been established, or while first responders are establishing the cache, drivers should place their unit and pump if it is a suppression-capable unit and deploy a charged hose line. Again, if the scene requires a charged hose line, you can do so. If not, you can wait to be told to do so. As with the previous slide for drivers, if there is no fire or small fire, a small line can be pulled. For a larger fire, the appropriate line should be determined, the fire extinguished prior to moving on to other tasks. The role of the fire officer is again to determine resource needs based on the instance requirements and triage reports from EMS personnel. They must also establish command if there are 3 or more fire department units responding to the call. If extrication is needed and an officer is assigned to the extrication group by the IC, they will assist in developing a plan and coordinating with other units how the extrication plan will proceed. They will also update the IC on their progress throughout the incident. When crews are performing extrication, it is one of the few skills that must be done with purpose, but can also be a slow process at times. Depending on the plan and the technique that the crew determines, the extrication may be prolonged, as there could be several points requiring cutting, exposing, or weakening throughout the vehicle. Extrication is also dynamic. Though the car itself does not move, parts of the car may not respond to equipment as anticipated, which may cause the crew to abandon one plan for another. Crews must be patient and work together to develop an extrication plan or several extrication plans during the course of the extrication process to gain access to the victims. Despite any challenges the crew may encounter, they must remain vigilant and attempt any technique they can use until extrication is successful. Once they have gained access and extrication is complete, crews can then move on to assisting EMS with extracting the victim from the vehicle. Vehicle accidents are common responses within the world of EMS and fire. This presentation and flowchart was designed to outline expectations for how emergency crews can respond and operate to these incidents. Remember that having a game plan is the first step in becoming an effective responder, but not every situation will be the same. Responders must be able to adapt to whatever situation is presented to them and make decisions that will help the overall incident. Responders rarely rise to the occasion that is at hand, but fall to their level of training. This training provided a general outline of how emergency crews are expected to respond, as well as the expectations for tasks to be accomplished by each role.